You're listening to The Conversation. It's May 1959 in a corner of northwestern Greenland. A group of American soldiers are on a secret mission to carve a new US military base out of the ice in this remote place high up on Greenland's ice sheet. The soldiers cut trenches in the snow and covered them with metal arches. Then they used snowblowers from the Swiss Alps to blow snow over the roofs. In the sub-zero temperatures, the snow instantly freezes, making a tunnel. Eventually, the longest tunnel will be 1,000 feet long. This is Camp Century. There are hundreds of civilian scientists there too. Their job is to learn about the ice and its place in our global climate by drilling a mile down to collect ice cores. But by 1966, Camp Century has been abandoned, deemed too expensive and difficult to maintain. Today, 60 years later, Donald Trump is insisting he will secure the entire island of Greenland for the US, despite protestations from Denmark and Greenlanders themselves.
I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States. But this would not be a threat to NATO. This would greatly enhance the security of the entire alliance, the NATO alliance.
The president tonight in the heart of Europe abruptly backing off two bold threats regarding his ongoing quest to control Greenland, tariffs and military action, posting he's reached a framework of a future deal with the Secretary General of NATO, but when pressed, providing no further details.
One of the attractions of Greenland is the gleam of its rich mineral wealth. Now that Greenland's ice sheet is melting due to global warming, will this make the mineral riches easier to get at? The story of what happened to Camp Century and to the ice cores, misplaced for decades but now back under the microscope, can help us to understand why it's not that simple. I'm Gemma Ware from The Conversation, a news and analysis platform partnering journalists with academics. Welcome to The Conversation Weekly, where experts explain how we ended up here. In this episode, what the history of Greenland's ice sheet reveals about the real strategic importance of the island. Paul Bierman, you're a professor of natural resources and environment at the University of Vermont in the US, where you're an expert on Greenland, and you're also author of a book called When the Ice is Gone, about the history of Greenland's ice sheet. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Paul, take me back. It's the early 1960s, and the United States is building a secret military base in Greenland. Why, and what are they doing?
So the main goal of Camp Century was understanding how to build a base inside an ice sheet and to have a military presence in the Arctic. It's the middle of the Cold War. The United States is paranoid about Russian missiles, about Russian soldiers, about Russian bombers, and they want to have a strategic presence in the Arctic in a way they haven't had before. They start building this base, they lay it out, and they build it by excavating 30 to 40 foot deep tunnels in the snow. They use giant snowblowers from the Swiss Alps to do this. And so they build a massive under snow camp out of native materials, out of the snow. But from the beginning, the camp is unusual because not only can they put 200 men in the camp, and I say men because there's no verified information that a woman ever was stationed at the camp. They put a nuclear reactor in it because otherwise they would have been moving huge amounts of diesel fuel 138 miles across the ice to fuel this. So we have a nuclear-powered base inside the ice sheet starting in 1960. In the fall of 1960, they turn on that reactor, and it lasts for 6 years.
And part of that project was called Project Iceworm. Tell me about that element on it. This is moving nuclear warheads through these tunnels.
Yeah, so Project Iceworm was in many ways a strategic fantasy that first the Army promulgated because the other two services had nuclear weapons, the Navy and the Air Force, but the Army did not. And they thought this would be a way to have the Army involved in the nuclear arms race, which meant a lot of money. So the original plan for this was to dig these snow tunnels throughout an area about the size of the U.S. state of Alabama. And they would crisscross under the ice. They would have launching sites, but the Russians, the Soviets, wouldn't know where these missiles were at any time because they'd be on flat cars moving around on railroad tracks inside the ice. It's a giant shell game. So at Camp Century, they tried to see if this would work. And they got as far as 1,600 feet of tunnel in a big arcing circle with 1,300 feet of track, a heavy military truck running on that track, and a flat car. And it didn't take long before they realized that this wasn't going to work. The sides of the tunnels were collapsing inwards. The rails were warping because the snow was moving. And Project Iceworm was nothing more than this 1,300 feet of track. It never came to be. President Kennedy vetoed it first. Then the Army approached NATO. NATO quickly vetoed it because it was extraordinarily expensive. And it might have lasted a couple years at most before those tunnels collapsed. Although people find this Project Iceworm, this idea of basing missiles inside the ice sheet in a series of tunnels, really attractive, it was a very minor part of what was going on in the camp. It was an idea that because the snow and ice were dynamic, turned out to be a failure.
So there was a group of scientists there at Camp Century 2 whose job, like yours today, was to study the ice. What were they doing and what were they trying to find out?
In December of 1960, they brought a unique ice drill to Camp Century with the plan in only a year or two to drill through the ice sheet to the bottom and to find out what was underneath. This was going to be the first continuous deep ice core. It didn't go well in 1960. They drilled a few tens of feet, had trouble with the drill, and packed up right after Christmas and went home. But these folks were persistent. They came back year after year. And by 1966, they had revised their drill and they got to the bottom of the ice sheet. On early July 1966, they brought up the last pieces of core. They were almost a mile deep, and those last couple pieces were 11 feet of frozen soil from under the ice.
From the conversations and the research that you've done, what do we know about what it was like for these scientists, these men, as you say, who were working in this under snow camp?
It was actually luxurious compared to all the other ice coring that's been done since. They had a full mess hall to eat. They had chefs to cook 4 meals a day because people worked around the clock. They were working in a covered trench, so they weren't exposed to the elements. It was a very protected place to work. There are pictures of guys with no gloves on working in there. So they had everything possible. They had consistent power to drive their drills. They had machine shops. This is not a luxury you typically have drilling ice cores. So I don't think from the photographs I've seen and the descriptions that they were challenged by logistics. They were challenged by doing something for the first time ever. These men did something no one had ever done before. They drilled through an ice sheet. They figured out the technology, and they did it in 6 years. And there have been many analogies made between the building of Camp Century, the same challenge of doing that, the drilling of the ice core, and actually sending the first people to the moon in the 1960s. These audacious ideas that actually happened.
And decades after this happened, you've been involved in gaining access to these ice cores again. Tell me about your role in uncovering what they drilled down and found.
So I've worked in Greenland since 2008. My first 4 or 5 years were working in the field in Greenland, collecting samples around the ice by helicopter. And then in 2014, we started looking at actually the U.S. ice core from the center of Greenland. Again, the bottom, because I'm a geologist who works at Earth's surface and tries to understand how Earth works. So I was much more interested in the dirt and the sediment than I was in the ice. And I started asking around about the bottom of the Camp Century core, and everybody I knew just shook their head and said, it's gone. It's not there. You're never going to see that. And luckily, I have a Danish colleague by the name of Dorthe Dahl Jensen, who I bumped into in a meeting in 2018. And she said, Paul, you really need to come to Denmark. We found some things you'll be interested in. And I got on an airplane and I went to Denmark, and they took us to their new ice core freezer. And they had amalgamated cores that they'd had scattered all over Copenhagen to a brand new, beautiful freezer. And they were cataloging all these, and they had found this 11 feet of frozen material, completely safe in the original box where it had been stored at the University of Buffalo and then sent to Copenhagen. But think about where that comes from. It comes from under a mile of ice, right? That's the frozen soil beneath the world's second biggest ice sheet. And somebody got it. That's just stunning. And we assembled a team of about a dozen people. And in only a few months, we did a whole suite of analyses. And it became quite clear that this was an archive of history like we had never seen. That ice core is critical for our understanding of climate. It was the first deep ice core, and it told us that over the last 100,000 years, Earth's climate had warmed and cooled naturally. The 11 feet at the bottom, Those take us back much further in time, and in fact, they take us to a time when a large portion, if not all, of the Greenland ice sheet had melted away and disappeared. And instead of a mile of ice where Camp Century is today, there was Arctic tundra and no ice.
So this discovery that you've made by analysing this 11 feet of soil, why is it important? Why does it matter that we know that Greenland didn't used to be covered in ice?
It matters because right now humans are warming the climate in a way for which there's really no natural analogy for this. We are warming the climate at a rate that's unprecedented. We are watching every day the Greenland ice sheet melt. We have very good data that shows over the last 20 years that the ice sheet is shrinking. Yet we don't know very well the long-term history of that ice sheet. But as geoscientists, we think in thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. We use the past as a way to understand what the future might bring. By looking back to the past, by now knowing when the ice last disappeared at Camp Century, and we know that is 400,000 years ago, a warm period, about as warm as we have made the climate today after the Industrial Revolution, that ice disappeared on its own, which suggests to us that we have done enough warming now to probably make the ice at Camp Century disappear again. That matters to humanity because when the Greenland ice sheet shrinks, all that water that's stored up on land in this giant ice cube melts, runs down rivers, and ends up in the ocean. And just like your bathtub, if you turn that tap on and you add water to your bathtub, the level is going to rise. That is exactly what's going to happen to the global oceans and is already happening because we're melting ice sheets. What we know in the past is Greenland is capable of melting its ice and capable of raising global sea level.
Tell us, what happened to Camp Century?
Camp Century was abandoned in 1966. They went back in 67 and pulled out some diesel fuel. And then the last people who ever saw Camp Century went in 1969. And there's a wonderful set of photographs they took. They barely could crawl through the tunnels because the ice had moved, the snow had moved, and it had closed these tunnels. Things that were 15 feet wide were now 3 feet wide, and the soldiers had to crawl through them. The camp was completely smashed. The snow kept falling. The camp is now entombed in snow, at least 100 feet of snow and ice. With modern technology, though, we can see it using radar through the snow. So we can see exactly where the camp is. We know how deep it is. But the other thing we can do is model, given what we think the temperatures will do, extrapolating from the rise since the Industrial Revolution and the amount of carbon dioxide we're emitting. We can model when that part of the ice sheet is going to go from accumulating snow, which buries the camp, to melting. And the estimates are that within the next 100 years, the area where Camp Century is will start to melt instead of accumulating snow. And eventually, that camp, which is wood, metal, lead, PCBs, asbestos, and millions of gallons of sewage from all the men who lived there for 6 years, eventually, that's going to start to melt and come back to the surface.
Coming up, Greenland is rich in minerals, but how easy are they to mine? And will climate change make that any easier?
I was saved by God to make America great again.
An autocrat loves a crisis. A crisis is the way that they mobilize their base.
While America is under invasion from within, we're under invasion from within.
He's testing the boundaries of what he can get away with.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
We've asked 6 of the world's preeminent scholars how we can measure the make of an autocrat. It's a recipe of sorts, tried and tested by the most infamous leaders in history.
Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler.
Viktor Orban in Hungary.
He's basically bulletproof in terms of criminal prosecution.
Join us from December 29 as we explore Trump, the making of an autocrat, from The Conversation.
Hi, it's Chloe here. Since the summer, I've been working on a story all about the truth behind the memoir, The Salt Path.
I would say that this has got to be one of the biggest literary scandals of the 21st century.
It's left me wondering, how far can you bend the truth before it begins to break? Search for The Walkers, The Real Salt Path. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
So, Paul, Camp Century was ultimately abandoned and now lies beneath the Greenland ice sheet. What that tells us really is that Greenland is shifting, it's moving, the ice is unpredictable, and that makes building infrastructure there really difficult. And yet there is now a lot of geopolitical attention on Greenland as both a strategic military location and because of its mineral wealth. While this crisis over its future is raging, what's actually happening to the ice sheet on Greenland right now?
So the Arctic is warming several times faster than where I live in Vermont or most of the UK. And that has to do with the loss of snow and ice. And you think about Greenland as a bright, shiny object that reflects a lot of the sunlight that's coming in. As that ice and snow melt, then instead of the sunlight bouncing back to space where it came from, it's absorbed by dark rocks, dark water, soil, and that warms the Arctic. And so that's happening. Greenland is warming. There's less sea ice. It lasts for less time. That's forced remote communities to build runways on land because they can't fly planes onto the ice anymore. But it is also melting the ice sheet, which has caused major floods as that water runs off, taking out 50-year-old bridges. And most importantly, it's starting to thaw the ground. So most of Greenland is frozen. It's what we refer to as permafrost, permanently frosty. And that's actually a very stable material, but it's very sensitive once it warms up. And so in the Arctic in the summer, typically the top 2 feet of the permafrost will melt and become what's known as the active layer, which really doesn't do it justice. It is a quagmire. It will suck the boot off your feet because it's just water saturated. There's ice below it. It's clay rich. Today it matters because it's making infrastructure more difficult to hold together around the edge of the ice sheet. And in terms of geologic hazards, those beautiful fjords you see pictures of in Greenland, the deep fjords with steep walls where most of the marine traffic has to go. Those rocks on the walls of the fjords are in part held together by ice. And so as the permafrost melts, giant rock slides and landslides happen on those steep fjord walls. That rock goes tumbling into the water below, and it actually generates waves that we refer to as tsunami. So there's a whole suite of geologic hazards that make maintaining infrastructure challenging in Greenland, unlike maintaining infrastructure in temperate regions.
How difficult does that make it as a place to live? How inhospitable does it make it?
One of my first experiences in Greenland, we were on the West Coast and we went to a town called Apernavik. Beautiful town, small buildings, and they had rented us a house, a colorful Danish house. And as we walked inside, we saw these metal pipes leading away from the building because the town was built mostly on rock. So there was no place for them to excavate, and the pipes were wrapped in sort of silvery insulation. And we realized that was the way that utilities came in and out of the house. And the toilet didn't have any water, and it had a bright yellow plastic bag. And we had to ask around a bit before someone said, every couple of days, a loader will come down the street. You put your plastic bag out and take it away because they have no sewage system. They couldn't pipe a sewage system through town. Like we bury our sewers, right? They couldn't do that because there was nothing to dig into. So, you would pee in this little urinal and it would run out onto the grass. And that's how you disposed of liquid waste. But the solid waste went into the yellow plastic bag. I think it's an illustration of how what we take for granted, again, in these mid-latitudes for infrastructure, it simply doesn't work in Greenland. It's a different place. And I think that has led to a lot of ideas from people who have never actually been there about what we might be able to do. And I think that spills into things like fossil fuel extraction and mining. And so there's been this drumbeat in the last 6 months, year in the United States about how Greenland is a mecca for mining critical minerals, for companies to become outrageously wealthy with these minerals. But I don't think most of the people saying that have spent time working in the field in Greenland. And they don't know that, for instance, there's no national power network. There's no national road network. There is a very small highly trained workforce because there are less than 60,000 people in the country. And there are these logistical issues that you do not face in Europe or the continental United States.
Greenland also has significant deposits of many mineral resources, including rare earth minerals, which are really sought after at the moment and geopolitically, strategically important. If Greenland's minerals are so valuable, then what's stopping more companies going after these resources?
The Geologic Survey of Greenland has mapped all around the margins of the country, and there's gold, there are rare earth minerals, but there are gold and rare earth minerals elsewhere in the world, in places where there's infrastructure developed, there are road networks developed, there are processing plants developed, there are electrical systems developed, right? Here, you're going to a place where there is none of that supporting infrastructure. So you have to start from scratch completely. And 6 months of the year, there's not as much light. Maybe there's no light. There are temperatures at minus 30, minus 40 degrees that you have to deal with. Modern internal combustion engines don't work very well at those temperatures. Equipment becomes brittle and breaks. It's very hard to get parts in if you can only bring them in by helicopter because there's no road network and very expensive. So I think all of these things conspire to make it exceptionally difficult to extract these minerals, and that means exceptionally expensive. So there is one mine right now that's active in Greenland. It is mining a mineral called anorthosite, which is useful for making things like fiberglass. It's high in silica and aluminum. It's open intermittently. And I think the answer is actually fairly simple. Greenland is open for mining. Their ministers have encouraged foreign companies to come in and mine. I think it is the capitalist system and it's the companies looking and saying it is so costly and so risky to develop these endeavors that they're mining elsewhere. If there were all these minerals there that could be extracted at a reasonable price and a reasonable risk, people would be there doing it. They simply are not. There's also the irony, I think, at this point for the United States, where many of these rare earth minerals are minerals that are used in this transition from a carbon-based economy to an electrically based economy. And yet, in the last year, we have changed our national policy from one based on electrical power back to one based on fossil fuels. There's a tension between wanting all these rare earth minerals, but then potentially their usage is going to decrease. So if you're a company extracting minerals and you're looking ahead, you've added even more uncertainty to this idea of spending a lot of money in a very difficult place to work.
The Arctic is the fastest changing part of our planet, and the Greenland ice sheet, as you've outlined, is melting incredibly fast. Does the melting ice in Greenland mean that the mineral wealth is actually getting closer to the surface?
Sure, but I don't think that's the attraction. There's plenty of these minerals around the edges, and the ice is not melting that quickly. And when it does, that area within hundreds of feet, half a mile of the ice is a quagmire. It's chunks of ice, it's melting ice, it's snow, it's mud, it's rock, it's sand. It's not a place you would set up a mine. The ground is incredibly unstable where that ice is leaving right now. So it's not as though the ice sheet went away and the flowers came up and there's an invitation to put your big mine there. It's literally a minefield of geologic hazards at the margin of the ice sheet. So again, I think that's very much a fantasy from people who haven't worked there day in and day out. The areas that are being prospected for mining are in places where the ice has been gone for thousands of years. They're around the edges. The active mine is the same thing. They're not right at the margin of the ice sheet. That's not a place I would even put my house, much less a mine that you're investing many millions in. It's a geologically unstable place.
So it's a misnomer to this narrative that climate change is making the minerals in Greenland more accessible. What you're saying is the evidence just doesn't say that.
It's a complete fallacy. There's no factual basis for the fact that climate change is opening up these areas to mine. In fact, it's making them more hazardous. And it's making shipping more hazardous, and it's making building remote facilities more hazardous. And one of the arguments against fossil fuel extraction is the danger of the icebergs that are now calving off many of these glaciers. And you have a drilling platform out there and a large iceberg heads your way. It's a Titanic all over again, right? In the last several years, 2021, the Greenlandic people shut down their potential extraction of fossil fuels and the exploration for fossil fuels. But that was in part based by a decade of drilling that didn't produce any fantastic finds and a worry of those people that they didn't want to exacerbate the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they wanted to be a carbon neutral country.
Paul, in his recent remarks about Greenland, Donald Trump has emphasized the island's strategic military location and why he believes the US needs to secure it to prevent Russian and Chinese activity there.
If we don't go in, Russia's going to go in and China's going to go in. And there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it, but we can do everything about it.
But considering that the US, through a 1941 deal it made with Denmark during World War II, can actually send as many troops there as it wants to, many observers are remarking that Trump's goal here is naked territorial ambition, and that includes ambition to mine on Greenland too. What do you think is going on?
I often talk to my students about Greenland being a big, bright, shiny object in the North Atlantic. The bright part is simple. It's covered in snow, right? And that's very important for climate. The big part is actually a distortion based on world maps. So we typically use a map projection called the Mercator projection, which makes Greenland look huge. But in fact, Greenland's about the size of the east coast of the United States. It's not so huge. And Trump himself has talked about how he has to get this really big island. So I think in some ways, it's an impression. And in his interview with the New York Times, he talked about how he needs the island psychologically.
Ownership is very important,
Why is ownership important here?
Because it's what I feel is psychologically needed for success.
So I think these are all rationalizations for one person who wants to possess this island. Strategically, I am baffled by what's going on right now. I don't understand it strategically. I don't understand it economically. I don't understand it geologically. And I think the best explanation is Trump's explanation to those New York Times reporters of he simply wants this big, bright, shiny object in the North Atlantic.
So then what is, to you, as an environmental scientist, the most valuable resource in Greenland?
It's the ice sheet. And I say that because if that ice sheet melts completely, and that's going to take centuries at least, world sea level is going to rise on average about 24 feet. That will destabilize the entire global political order because it will turn 500 million people into refugees because their homes, their businesses, their farms, their cities will be underwater. So I've always looked at Greenland and said what we need to do there is preserve the ice because that is what really matters. It's not the flash in the pan of a rare earth element, a little bit more fossil fuels. We could destabilize the entire global world order by flooding every major coastal city, and that is exactly what's going to happen if we let the ice sheet melt.
Well, thank you, Paul. I think it's an important place to end with that warning so people understand its importance. We appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
To read more analysis about the Greenland crisis from experts around the world, go to theconversation.com, and we'll put some links to further reading in our show notes too. This episode of The Conversation Weekly was written and produced by Mend Mariwani and me, Gemma Ware, with assistance from Katie Flood. Sound mixing is by Michelle Macklem, and our theme music is by Nita Saal. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us directly at podcast@theconversation.com. You can also sign up for The Conversation's free daily newsletter by clicking on the link in our show notes. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please support us at donate.theconversation.com. And please do also rate and review the podcast wherever you follow us. Thanks for listening.
Hiya, I'm Katie Edwards, and I'm a health editor at The Conversation.
I'm Dan Baumgart. I'm a lecturer in health and life sciences at the University of Bristol, where I also work as a GP.
And we work together a lot, and we try to explain weird and wonderful things about the body. And now we're teaming up to host Strange Health, which is a new video podcast from The Conversation.
So each episode, we're going to be taking a health trend going viral on social media.
You know the kind of thing. Drink chlorophyll to make sure you don't stink.
Do you really need to detox in January?
Have a supplement to make your bum look better. All that kind of thing. Each week, it's going to be me and Dan, plus an expert, who are going to thrash out between the truths and the myths.
You know, me being an anatomist, I was like, can I have a look? And it was huge.
The liver is amazing. It's probably the only organ that can regenerate itself completely.
And we're calling it Strange Health because we're not scared of disgusting things. Episode 1 arrives on the 20th of January. So follow us on YouTube or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.